My name is Elena Ward, and the house has never felt this big. When Daniel left for his assignment, 3 months overseas, maybe more, I told myself I'd be fine. I said the words the way people say them to stop a crack from widening. I'll be fine. But the echo that followed was louder than I expected, and by the second night, silence had settled over everything like dust. I tried filling it. Music, television, the sound of running water. But silence is clever. It hides between things, waiting. And in that waiting, I began to notice a different sound. Soft, cautious, almost like footsteps outside. It started the third evening. I'd gone out to take the trash, rain misting the air, the streetlights trembling against the fog. When I turned back toward the porch, I saw him, a dog, standing at the edge of the driveway. Brown, thick-coated, eyes reflecting the weak light like 2 small lanterns. He didn't bark, didn't move, just watched me. I whispered, "Hey there," because that's what you do when faced with a creature that looks both lost and certain. He tilted his head but stayed where he was. I went inside, closed the door, and told myself that was the end of it. But it wasn't. The next morning he was sitting on the steps. Rain had hardened into frost overnight, and his fur was dusted white. He looked like he belonged to winter. I should have been afraid. Stray dogs can be unpredictable. But there was something measured in the way he waited, as if he'd already decided I wasn't a threat. "Where did you come from?" I asked through the window. He lifted one paw, placed it back down. A quiet answer. I made coffee, stood at the sink, and kept glancing out. He didn't move. When I finally opened the door, the cold bit my face. He stood, shook himself, and wagged his tail once, slow and heavy. "Okay," I said, half to him, half to the empty street. "You win." I poured some water into a bowl and set it near the porch. He waited until I stepped back before drinking. Then, as if he'd fulfilled an unspoken rule, he walked past me and lay down by the door. That was how it began. The quiet companionship of 2 lonely beings who hadn't planned on each other. I named him Rufus, mostly because he looked like one, rugged, dignified, the kind of name that doesn't ask for attention but earns it. He followed me everywhere after that, from room to room, across the creaking floors, his nails ticking like a metronome to my thoughts. When I cooked, he sat by the counter, head tilted. When I painted, he watched the brush move as if it mattered. At night, he slept near the door, the guardian of a home too empty for 2 people, but just right for 1 and a dog. Daniel called every few days, his voice filtered through static and distance. "You sound good," he said once. I wanted to tell him about Rufus, about how the silence had shape now, how it breathed beside me. But something in his tone, tired, distracted, made me hold it back. It felt private, this strange friendship, like a secret that wasn't shameful, but sacred. Sometimes I caught myself talking to Rufus the way I used to talk to Daniel. Half thoughts, quiet complaints, unfinished dreams. He'd listen, always, eyes steady, head resting on his paws. It was unnerving, that kind of attention. Humans rarely listen without waiting to reply. Dogs, though, they just listen. One night, I woke to the sound of wind dragging itself along the walls. Rufus was standing by the window, ears sharp, body tense. I followed his gaze. Across the street, the old neighbor's porch light flickered. For a moment, I thought I saw movement. A shadow stepping out, then gone. Rufus growled, low and warning. I put a hand on his back. "It's okay," I whispered, though I wasn't sure it was. The next morning, I found muddy paw prints not his, too small, scattered near the gate. Maybe kids, maybe nothing. But Rufus stayed closer that day, never more than a few feet away, like he'd taken a silent oath. Weeks passed. The rhythm of our days became something between ritual and refuge. Morning walks under gray skies, coffee for me, dry biscuits for him. Evenings with the fire crackling, his head on my foot, the television murmuring nonsense neither of us watched. It was during one of those evenings that I realized how strange it felt to feel safe again. Not happy, safety is quieter than that, but grounded. Rufus would glance at me every so often, as if checking that I was still there, still breathing, still choosing the present over memory. I began painting again. Daniel had always encouraged it, but somewhere between jobs and obligations, I'd stopped. Now I found myself drawn to it, colors spreading across canvas like new language. Rufus would lie beside the easel, eyes following the brush. When I painted him, he stayed unusually still, as if aware of the responsibility of being seen. It wasn't perfection I painted. It was presence, the slight curve of his ear, the way light caught his fur, the kind of details that prove something exists because you took the time to notice. One afternoon, snow started falling, the kind that turns everything into slow motion. I was on the phone with Daniel. He sounded rushed, distant. "They might extend the project," he said. "A few more weeks," my chest tightened. "You said you'd be home by Christmas." "I know. I'll try." His voice softened. "You're okay though, right?" I looked at Rufus, lying by the window, snowflakes melting on the glass behind him. "Yeah," I said. "I'm okay." After we hung up, I sat on the floor beside Rufus and buried my fingers in his fur. "It's just us," I whispered. He sighed, a deep, contented sound, and rested his head on my knee. That night, the power went out. The house filled with the strange hum of silence again. I lit candles, the room flickering with amber light. Shadows swayed on the walls. Rufus lay near the couch, half in light, half in dark. I remember thinking he looked like both sides of me, the part that endured and the part that waited. Outside, snow kept falling. The world softened until it almost didn't exist. Days folded into each other, and then came the sound that changed everything, a whimper, faint, from the back door. Rufus wasn't there. He was beside me. When I opened the door, I found a smaller dog, thin and shaking, eyes wild. A stray, probably lost in the storm. Rufus stepped forward, stiff but curious. The smaller dog growled, uncertain. "It's okay," I murmured, as if they could both understand. "You can stay for now." I dried the little one, fed him, named him Scout because he looked like he'd been searching for a long time. Rufus watched from a distance, patient but wary. For 2 days they circled each other, territory negotiations in silence. By the third they slept side by side. Something in me softened watching them. It felt like proof that loneliness can expand without breaking, that hearts have more room than we think. Daniel called less often. When he did, the connection faltered. He spoke of deadlines, delays, exhaustion. "You'd like it here," he said once. "The sunsets are insane." I didn't tell him that I hadn't seen a sunset in weeks, not properly. That my evenings belonged to walks with 2 dogs and the echo of our footsteps on frozen pavement. That sometimes when I saw my reflection in a shop window, I barely recognized the woman staring back. Rufus noticed before I did that something was changing. He'd press closer when I lingered too long by the window, or when I scrolled through old photos of Daniel and me, back when we believed distance was temporary. He'd nudge my hand, grounding me in the now. It worked. Mostly. One evening there was another knock. Sharp, deliberate. I froze. Rufus growled low. Scout darted behind him. The knock came again. When I opened the door, a woman stood there, bundled in a red coat, eyes wide. "Sorry," she said quickly. "Have you seen a dog?" Medium-sized, brown, answers to. She stopped when she saw Rufus. "That's him." My heart stuttered. "Rufus? I call him Bear," she said, relief flooding her voice. "He ran off last month." I've been looking everywhere. For a moment, the world narrowed to the space between us. The woman's outstretched hand, the quiet tremor of her voice, the dog at my feet who had built a home in my silence. I looked at him. He looked at me. "Bear?" she said again, stepping forward. Rufus didn't move. I knelt, touched his collarless neck. "You can go if you want," I whispered. His ears flicked back. The woman crouched too, holding out her hand. He sniffed it, polite but detached, then leaned his weight against me. "I think he's chosen," I said quietly. The woman smiled, tired and sad. Maybe he just needed somewhere to rest. She hesitated, then nodded. "Keep him if he's happier here. I just wanted to know he was safe." When she left, I stood in the doorway for a long time, snow curling around my feet. Rufus pressed against my leg, solid and real. "I guess we belong to each other now," I said. He wagged his tail once, slow and certain. That night Daniel called again. "I might not make it home this month," he said. Something in me stopped pretending to be surprised. "It's okay," I said. "Really?" "Yeah, we're fine. We." The word slipped out before I could catch it. I meant Rufus and me, maybe Scout too, but I didn't explain. Daniel was silent on the other end, then said, "I miss you." I wanted to answer, but the truth was complicated. Missing is easy. Returning is hard. When we hung up, I turned off the lights and sat in the dark with the dogs beside me. The fire had gone out, but their bodies radiated warmth, the kind that doesn't ask for anything in return. And for the first time since Daniel left, I didn't feel abandoned. I felt accompanied. The next morning began with the sound of Rufus padding across the hardwood floor, claws ticking softly, a rhythm I'd grown to depend on. I opened my eyes to gray light spilling through the curtains and the faint creak of the house expanding in the cold. Scout was curled at the foot of the bed, small and warm, dreaming. Rufus was sitting by the door, his silhouette patient, almost human in its stillness. For a moment, I lay there, caught between the safety of the present and the ache of memory. Daniel's voice from the night before still echoed in my head. "I miss you." I believed him, but distance has a way of reshaping love into something abstract, like a photograph left too long in sunlight. It fades, and you can't tell whether what you miss is the person or the way you felt when they were near. "Come on," I whispered, throwing off the blanket. Rufus turned his head, eyes gleaming in the half-light. "Let's face the day. The house was colder than usual." I pulled on a sweater, started coffee, fed the dogs. Steam rose from their bowls as they ate, quiet and focused, as if nothing in the world existed beyond breakfast. I watched them and thought of how simple survival can look when you strip it of thought. Food, warmth, company. Maybe that's all any of us are trying to find. Outside, snow had stopped. The air was sharp, still, and the world looked reset, edges softened by frost. We walked the familiar route through the neighborhood, past the maple tree that creaked even when there was no wind, past the empty bench where Daniel and I once sat eating sandwiches in summer. Rufus walked close, his pace steady, while Scout darted ahead, curious and unburdened by memory. I envied him that, the freedom of not remembering. When we reached the park, I stopped and breathed in. The lake was frozen over, a silver mirror reflecting nothing but the sky. Rufus sat beside me, gaze fixed on the horizon. "He'll come home soon," I said, more to convince myself than him. Rufus glanced at me, eyes deep and knowing. It was absurd to believe he understood the words, but somehow I felt he did. That evening, a letter arrived. Real paper, Daniel's handwriting. The sight of it startled me. People don't send letters anymore. I turned it over before opening it, feeling the indent of his pen through the envelope. Rufus watched me from the rug, head resting on his paws. Inside were 2 pages. His words were careful, deliberate, too deliberate. He wrote about the project, the weather, the sunsets that reminded him of home. And near the end, one line that stopped me cold. Sometimes I wonder if the distance is showing us who we really are, or who we were never meant to be. I read it 3 times, each one duller than the last. I folded the pages neatly, placed them on the table, and sat staring at nothing. Rufus came over and pressed his head against my leg. The gesture undid me. I buried my face in his fur, breathing in the scent of pine and warmth and life, and whispered, "I don't know anymore." Outside the wind rose, brushing against the windows like a whisper too soft to understand. The following days felt heavier. Not bad exactly, just full of thoughts I couldn't shake, silences I couldn't fill. Rufus followed me through every room as if tethered by invisible thread. When I painted, he sat beside the easel. When I worked at my laptop, he lay across my feet, grounding me to something that wasn't dissolving. Scout was lighter, a flicker of joy and motion. He chased the light through the curtains, barked at his reflection, fell asleep mid-play. Watching them together was like watching the balance of 2 halves, one still, one restless. Between them, I found my own reflection, a woman learning to live in between. One afternoon, the sky changed suddenly, clouds thickening, air tightening. I sensed it before I saw it, the storm. Rufus did too. He stood, ears pricked, eyes to the window. Within minutes, wind slammed against the house, and the first flakes began to fall sideways. I gathered candles, flashlights, the small rituals of preparedness that make you feel in control of what isn't. By nightfall, the storm was a wall of white. The windows blurred, the world erased. I built a fire, its crackle the only sound brave enough to break the silence. The dogs lay near it, the glow painting their fur in gold and shadow. I sat across from them, a mug of tea cooling in my hands, and thought of Daniel somewhere far away, maybe looking at a different storm. Maybe not thinking of me at all. The power went out just after midnight. I didn't move to fix anything. I let the darkness take the corners of the room. Rufus lifted his head, watching me as if waiting for instruction. "It's all right," I said softly. "We're fine." He sighed and laid his head back down. It was strange how quickly I believed my own lie. When morning came, the world outside was unrecognizable. Snow had swallowed everything. Fences, paths, even the road. For a few hours, the town felt erased, the noise of it buried. It was beautiful, and it was lonely. I bundled up and went outside to shovel a path. Rufus followed, trudging through snow almost to his chest. Scout stayed on the porch, barking at the cold. I laughed. The sound startled me. It had been so long since I'd heard my own laughter that it felt foreign, like an echo from another life. As I cleared the steps, I noticed something glinting near the gate. Metal, half buried. I brushed away snow and found a small tag, the kind that hangs from a collar. The engraving was worn, letters fading, but I could still make out the name, Bear. I stared at it for a long time before tucking it into my pocket. Rufus had belonged to someone once, a lifetime ago. Maybe that woman in the red coat, maybe someone else before her. The thought struck me. That love can travel through so many hands and still find its way to you, changed but intact. That evening, I painted the tag. Just the tag, against a background of white, a symbol of belonging and loss all at once. When I finished, I looked at it and whispered, "You've had so many names, haven't you?" Rufus wagged his tail, slow and sure, as if confirming what I already knew. Names didn't matter. Presents did. Weeks passed. The snow melted, revealing the dull earth beneath. The days lengthened, sunlight stretching deeper into evening. Life resumed its quiet rhythm, work, walks, warmth. Yet underneath it all, there was a shift I couldn't ignore, like the faint vibration of something waiting to change. Daniel's messages came less often now, shorter, clipped. "Hope you're well. Busy week. Talk soon," I replied politely, never more than he gave. The distance had stopped feeling like geography. It felt like choice. One afternoon, as I was folding laundry, I found one of his old shirts buried at the back of the drawer. I held it up to the light. The fabric smelled faintly of cedar and the past. Rufus came closer, sniffed it, then looked up at me with something that wasn't curiosity. It was recognition. I smiled faintly. "You remember him," I said. "You were here before him, maybe, or after. It all blurs." I folded the shirt neatly, placed it back, and closed the drawer. Some ghosts are best left sleeping. Spring arrived almost unnoticed. Snow receding, air softening, color returning to the world. With it came a letter, this time not from Daniel, but from the landlord. "We're selling the property. New ownership next month." I read it twice. The words felt unreal, like a dream you wake from too slowly. That night I sat by the window long after dark. Rufus lay at my feet, Scout curled near the fire. The house felt alive, as if it too was listening. "I don't know where to go," I said quietly. Rufus raised his head, eyes calm. I smiled bitterly. "You'd follow me anyway, wouldn't you?" The truth was, I didn't want to leave. The walls held too many versions of me. The woman who waited, the one who broke, the one who learned to exist without being seen. But the decision wasn't mine anymore. A week later, Daniel called unexpectedly. His voice sounded brighter, lighter, as if carried by new air. "Good news," he said. "I'm coming home." For a second, I couldn't speak. "When?" "Next week. Finally." I should have felt joy, relief, something clean. Instead, there was a pause between my heartbeats, a hollow space that used to be longing. "That's great," I managed. "The house, there's news. They're selling," he hesitated. "We'll figure it out. Together. The word felt foreign now. I looked at Rufus sleeping near the window, the slow rise and fall of his chest steadier than my breath. "Yeah," I said softly. "Together." The day Daniel returned, the world bloomed with color, the kind of early summer brightness that makes you squint and remember. I met him at the airport. He looked the same, familiar smile, eyes that once held all my answers. We hugged, polite, careful. It felt like greeting an echo. On the drive home, he talked about flights, work, exhaustion. I nodded, smiled when expected. When we reached the house, Rufus bounded forward, tail wagging. Daniel laughed, crouching to greet him. "So this is the famous dog," he said. "You weren't kidding. He really does follow you everywhere." I wanted to tell him everything. How Rufus had filled the silence. How Scout had reminded me what lightness felt like. How I had changed in the spaces he left behind. But the words stayed lodged somewhere deep. Instead, I said, "Yeah, he does." That night, we sat at the table like strangers pretending to remember a script. Rufus lay between us, his head on my foot. Daniel reached for my hand. "It's good to be home." Home. The word hung between us, fragile. I smiled, but it didn't reach my eyes. Later, when he slept, I sat on the porch with Rufus beside me. The air was thick with the scent of rain. I whispered, "He's home, but I don't think I am." Rufus pressed his head against my knee, steady and unjudging. The sky trembled with distant thunder, and I felt something shift inside. Not breaking, not mending, just changing shape. The following days unfolded like a play I hadn't rehearsed for. Daniel tried, cooking breakfast, leaving notes, suggesting plans. But between every gesture was a silence neither of us dared to name. He was kind, but his eyes drifted elsewhere, to his phone, to thoughts he didn't share. The distance between us was no longer miles. It was measured in pauses. Rufus felt it too. He stayed close, watchful. Scout had grown bolder, younger somehow, chasing light through the house. The two of them were opposites of what Daniel and I had become. All movement and stillness, freedom and restraint. One evening, I found Daniel standing in the doorway of the studio, watching me paint. "You've changed," he said softly. "Maybe," I answered. He nodded, then smiled sadly. "Maybe we both have." I wanted to say I'd waited so long I'd forgotten what waiting was for. That I'd learned to live in the quiet, and now the noise of us felt too loud. But I just said, "Yeah." That night, I dreamed of walking down an endless road. Rufus was beside me, Daniel somewhere behind, his footsteps fading. When I turned, there was only snow. The end of summer came quickly. The new owners of the house sent another letter. "Please vacate by the 30th. Daniel suggested renting somewhere new, starting over. But the word start felt wrong. Starting implies you've stopped something first. I wasn't sure we ever had. The night before we left, I sat on the floor of the empty living room. The walls echoed differently without furniture, without memory to absorb the sound. Rufus and Scout lay on either side of me, their warmth holding me steady. Daniel was asleep upstairs, I whispered. "We'll go where the quiet feels like peace, not loneliness." Rufus lifted his head, as if promising to follow. When morning came, sunlight cut through the windows, sharp and golden. I stood in the doorway one last time. The house looked smaller now, reduced to walls and echoes. I took one final breath, the kind that feels like both goodbye and survival. Daniel carried boxes to the car. Rufus watched, tail swaying once, measured. Scout barked, impatient for movement. As I stepped outside, I felt the weight of all the days that had passed. The silences, the storms, the waiting, the love that had shifted, but not vanished. I closed the door behind me. The sound was final but gentle. Rufus trotted ahead, glancing back only once, and I followed. The road stretched before us, sun flickering through the trees, each step a soft surrender to what came next. We didn't look back again. The tires hummed against the asphalt, a low, continuous sound that felt almost like thought. Daniel was driving, eyes fixed on the stretch of highway ahead. Rufus sat between us in the back seat, calm and quiet, his head resting on the middle console, while Scout dozed in a tangled ball of fur at my feet. The morning light flickered through the trees, cutting across the windshield in golden flashes that came and went too quickly to catch. We didn't talk much. The air between us was full, but not hostile, the kind of silence that comes after a storm when everything is still rearranging itself. Daniel tapped the steering wheel in rhythm to some half-remembered song. I watched the horizon, the faint shimmer of heat, and thought about how every road feels like a question. Where does it end, and what will I be when it does? By midday, the city was far behind us. The buildings shrank into suggestion, replaced by wide fields and old fences leaning against time. Rufus shifted, pressing closer, as if sensing that leaving a place meant more than geography. His fur brushed against my arm, a soft reminder that no matter how much life changed, he'd always keep me tethered to the present. When we finally stopped for gas, Daniel stretched, looked up at the sun, and smiled like a man who wanted to believe everything was fine. "We're almost there," he said. I nodded but didn't ask where there was supposed to be. We had found a small rental cottage by the coast, a temporary plan until something permanent presented itself. A new start, he'd called it. I didn't correct him, though what I wanted was less of a start and more of an arrival. The cottage sat on a rise above the sea, small and gray, with paint peeling in places and ivy creeping up the walls. The sound of waves filled the air, constant and soothing, as if the ocean itself was breathing on my behalf. When we opened the door, the scent of salt and wood met us. Faintly damp, faintly alive. Rufus walked in first, tail raised, nose to the floor, mapping out every corner. Scout followed, barking once in approval. Daniel carried the last box inside and turned to me. "It's not much," he said, "but it's ours for now." I looked at him, at the way the light caught the side of his face. There was a gentleness there I hadn't seen in months, a hope trying to find footing. "It's enough," I said. We spent the first evening unpacking. I placed the painting of Rufus on the mantel, the one I'd done that winter when the world was snow. It looked strange against the faded blue wall, like a memory placed inside another memory. Daniel watched me for a moment, then smiled. "You really love that dog," he said lightly. I turned to look at Rufus, who was lying near the doorway, his eyes half closed. He found me when I didn't know I needed to be found. Daniel nodded but said nothing more. Outside, the sea kept moving, steady, unbothered. The days that followed unfolded quietly. Morning walks along the beach. Afternoons spent sorting through the fragments of a shared life. Boxes of old photos, half-forgotten books, the clutter of two people who once believed forever was a guarantee. Daniel worked remotely, his laptop glowing late into the night. I painted, I walked, I breathed. Rufus followed me everywhere, as he always had. His paws left shallow imprints in the wet sand that vanished with the tide, a soft reminder that even presence is temporary. Scout would run ahead, chasing gulls he'd never catch, barking at waves that rolled in too close. Sometimes I laughed, not the brittle laugh of survival, but something lighter, freer. And yet beneath the rhythm of our new days, there was something else, a hum of dissonance. Daniel tried, I could see that. He brought home flowers, cooked dinner, reached for my hand during walks, but our hearts had learned different languages in the months apart. His was built on plans and purpose, mine had become fluent in quiet. One evening, he found me standing at the edge of the water, watching the horizon fade into gray. Rufus was beside me, his coat glistening in the low light. "You still think too much," Daniel said gently. "Only when I stop pretending not to," I replied. He stepped closer, the wind catching his hair. "I know I left you alone for too long." "I wasn't alone," I said, looking down at Rufus. Daniel followed my gaze, his expression softening. I can see that. We stood there a long time saying nothing. The sea filled the spaces between us, vast and indifferent. I wondered if all marriages end like this. Not with anger, but with silence that grows too heavy to lift. It was Rufus who changed everything again. It happened slowly, quietly, the way age creeps in. One breath at a time until you notice what you can't undo. He began to tire easily. Our walks grew shorter. His once bright eyes dulled around the edges, though they still carried that steady warmth I relied on. One morning he didn't get up when I called. He looked at me, apologetic somehow, and laid his head back down. My chest tightened. "It's okay," I whispered, kneeling beside him. "We can rest today." Daniel called the vet, a kind woman who came to the cottage that afternoon. She examined him gently, murmuring words I barely heard. "He's older than you think," she said softly. "He may not have much time left, but he's comfortable. That's what matters." I nodded, numb. When she left, I sat beside him for hours, my hand on his back, feeling the slow rhythm of his breathing. Scout lay near the door watching quietly. Outside, the light shifted from gold to gray to blue. Time moved, but I didn't. When Daniel touched my shoulder that night, I turned to him with tears I hadn't realized were there. "He's been with me through everything," I said. "I know," he whispered. "You saved each other." I looked at him then, really looked, and saw in his eyes not guilt or distance, but understanding. For the first time in a long time, I let myself lean into him, the way a tree leans toward light. The days that followed were slow, gentle. I carried Rufus outside every morning to watch the ocean. He'd sit there, head high, eyes half closed, breathing the salt air like it belonged to him. Scout would curl beside him still as a shadow. Sometimes Daniel joined us, coffee in hand, silent but present. One morning, Rufus rested his head in my lap and didn't move again. The world went still. Even the waves seemed to pause. I felt his last breath leave him, soft and final, and something inside me went quiet too. I don't remember how long I sat there. Hours, maybe. The sun moved, the tide rose. Daniel was the one who finally wrapped his arms around me, steady and wordless. Scout pressed against my leg, whining softly. We buried Rufus near the edge of the dunes, where the sea would always be close but never claim him. I placed the old tag I'd found months ago, bare, on a small stone at his grave. I whispered, "You were every name I ever needed." When we walked back to the cottage, I didn't cry. The grief was too deep for tears. It lived in silence, in breath, in every space he'd left behind. Weeks passed, and the house adjusted to his absence the way all places do, quietly, relentlessly. Scout stopped searching after a while, though sometimes he'd pause by the door, as if listening for footsteps that would never come. I kept painting, but the colors had changed. Softer, muted, as though light itself had learned reverence. Daniel became gentler, too. We talked more, not about the past, but about small things. The garden, the sea, the way Scout always chose the warmest patch of floor to sleep on. There was kindness between us again, the kind that doesn't demand or explain. One evening, as we watched the sun bleed into the horizon, Daniel said, "I think we should stay." "Here?" He nodded. "This place feels like something honest. We don't have to rebuild what we had. We can build what's next." I turned to look at him. The light caught his face, and I saw the man I'd once loved. Not the version I'd lost, but the one who had found his way back differently. "Maybe," I said, "but not yet. I need time." He smiled, small and sad. "Then we'll take time." The seasons turned again. The garden bloomed. The sea grew louder with summer storms. I learned the rhythm of this new life, its solitude, its simplicity, its grace. Some days I still reached for Rufus out of habit, only to find air. But when I closed my eyes, I could still feel him near, a presence folded into memory, into breath. One late afternoon, I walked down to the dunes with Scout trotting beside me. The sky was bruised with sunset, streaks of rose and amber bleeding into blue. I sat where we'd buried Rufus, the wind pulling gently at my hair. I think I finally understand, I whispered. You didn't follow me everywhere. You were leading me here. Scout lay down beside me, head on my lap, as if sealing the thought with quiet approval. The sea roared below, endless and alive. When I went back to the cottage, Daniel was waiting on the porch. He reached for my hand. You okay? Yes, I said. And for once it was true. That night, I couldn't sleep. The air was heavy with salt and memory. I stepped outside, barefoot, the wooden planks cool beneath me. The moon was high, the world washed in silver. I could hear the tide coming in, slow, rhythmic, eternal. I whispered into the dark. Thank you. The wind shifted, warm against my skin, and for a moment, I imagined Rufus running along the shore, his shadow melting into the sand. The thought didn't hurt. It soothed. When I went back inside, Daniel stirred, half awake. Everything okay? He mumbled. Yeah, I said softly, climbing into bed. Everything's okay. He reached for my hand beneath the blanket, and I let him. The space between us wasn't empty anymore. It was full of loss, of love, of everything that makes staying harder and more beautiful than leaving. Outside, the waves kept moving. The wind breathed through the cracks of the old cottage. Scout sighed in his sleep, and somewhere beyond it all, in the quiet space between heartbeats and horizon, I felt Rufus again, patient, watching, waiting for nothing, because I had finally arrived. The world was still turning. The sea was still singing. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel followed. I felt found.